In this video, I do a comprehensive set of scientific tests on the Garmin Venu 2. First, I test the quality of the sleep tracking against a scientific EEG monitor. Second, I'll check the heart rate accuracy. Third, I'll evaluate the SpO2 or oxygen saturation measurements. Fourth, I'll take a look at the GPS accuracy. And finally, I'll do a step counting test. As always, I do not want to waste your time, so timestamps are in the description below and also on the timeline. Hello everyone, for those of you that are new to the channel, my name is Rob and I'm a postdoctoral scientist specializing in biological data analysis. I previously took a look at the sleep tracking and heart rate accuracy of the Garmin Venu 2. In this video, I'll show extra data for these features, and additionally I'll be looking at the oxygen saturation, GPS and step counting accuracy. I could list a lot of features of the Garmin Venu 2, but I'm not gonna do that. Other creators have already made great videos addressing these. Instead, on my channel, I try to test the accuracy of different measurements. So let's dive into the tests, and since I'm in a unique position to test the accuracy of the sleep tracking algorithm, I want to start off with the sleep test. For the sleep comparison, I wore the Garmin Venu 2 to bed for 8 nights, and at the same time I also wore either this portable scientific EEG device or this consumer EEG device, and I recorded myself using an infrared camera. The EEG devices can actually measure your brainwaves and muscle movements, and are therefore ideal for measuring your sleep stages. Now normally I just use this scientific EEG device called the ZMax, for which I can access the raw data and manually evaluate each of the individual nights. I have two reasons for also using this second EEG device, the Dream 2 headband. First of all, I've had the ZMax for about 3 years now, and the battery seems to be losing some of its capacity, so for a significant amount of nights the battery dies before I wake up. To ensure I had enough data for this video, I also used the Dream 2 for some nights. The second reason for using the Dream 2 headband is because I want to expand the sleep testing by also having other people test smartwatches while they sleep. However, they would need to wear an easy to use EEG device like the Dream 2 headband. In a scientific paper it was shown that the Dream 2 seemed to work really well. However, to get a feel for how well it works myself, I want to start using it in some tests. Now, I manually went through the recording of the scientific EEG device and scored each part of the night for the different sleep stages. I had to manually export the sleep stages from the Garmin app, since Garmin still provides limited data export when it comes to sleep tracking. Finally, I loaded all the data for the EEG devices and the Venu 2 into the coding language I use. Now, to the results I obtained. Let's first look at the accuracy over the 4 nights with the scientific EEG device. This part of the results is a recap of what I shared in a previous video. So if you do not want to see that recap, go ahead and skip to the next timestamp, where I look at the results for the second reference EEG device. We want to know if the Venu 2 predicts the correct sleep stages at the right time, and that is what is displayed here. On top we have the sleep stages according to the EEG device, and on the left the sleep stages according to the Venu 2. The sleep stages that are tracked are deep sleep, light sleep, REM sleep and awake. Now each column here sums to 100%, meaning that we can see what percentage of each of the actual sleep stages was recorded as each sleep stage by the Venu 2. All the stages that are correctly predicted will be along the diagonal of this matrix, which I will highlight in green as I'm explaining the results. First, looking at deep sleep, we see that almost 80% of what was deep sleep was also predicted as being deep sleep. So in other words, of all of the deep sleep I had, 80% was also marked as deep sleep by the Garmin Venu 2, which is pretty good. If it was confused, it was mostly confused with light sleep. Here I display an example night. On top you see the sleep stages as they were recorded using the EEG device. Along the horizontal axis we have the time of night, and as you can see I went to bed after midnight. Along the vertical axis we have the different sleep stages, that being deep sleep, light sleep, REM sleep and awake. The sleep stages are plotted in the same order that are usually displayed in research. On the bottom you can see a similar plot, but now for the sleep stages as they were recorded using the Venu 2. Now in purple here I marked what was deep sleep. Now most nights the Venu 2 was pretty good at detecting deep sleep, as it mostly predicted the correct amount and at the right time, of which this is one good example. Though sometimes it will predict some extra deep sleep later in the night, as you can see here for instance. Light sleep also shows a decent accuracy, with 68% of what was light sleep also being correctly predicted as light sleep. If it was confused, it was mostly confused with deep sleep and REM sleep. REM sleep detection was not very good. Only 43% of what was REM sleep was also correctly predicted as being REM sleep. Most REM sleep I had was actually being predicted as light sleep by the Venu 2. Here we see a similar plot to before, but now for REM sleep marked in red. Some nights it basically predicted no REM sleep, as you can see for this night right here. This also means we would not be able to see the different sleep cycles. To see the sleep cycles, I added non-REM sleep in blue and again marked REM sleep in red. Each sleep cycle starts with a combination of deep sleep and light sleep together called non-REM and always ends in REM. We can basically see none of the sleep cycles based on just the data from the Garmin Venu 2 for this night. For this night right here, it's arguably a bit better, however we still see a lot of extra REM sleep, which makes seeing the sleep cycles quite difficult. Awake detection was okay, with 72% of my awake moments correctly detected as awake moments. However, it did predict some extra awake time. If it was confused, it was mostly confused with light sleep. So the accuracy of the sleep tracking is mixed, with good and decent deep sleep, light sleep and awake time tracking. However, tracking REM sleep and the sleep cycles is pretty bad. The question is, do we get the same results when using the Dream 2 EEG headband as a reference device? I wore both the Dream 2 headband and the Venu 2 for 4 nights. However, first a quick side note. If you're interested in the latest updates of the wearables I'm testing, consider subscribing to my Instagram and my weekly newsletter. Of course, you would also make me really happy if you subscribe to this YouTube channel. Enough self-promotion, let's get back to the results. Here we have a similar overview plot to before, but now instead of comparing the Venu 2 to the Z-Max, we're comparing it to the Muse 2 EEG headband. First, looking at deep sleep, we again see that about 80% is correctly predicted, so deep sleep prediction appears to be pretty accurate. If deep sleep was confused, it was mostly confused with light sleep. Light sleep tracking was good as well, with about 67% of light sleep correctly predicted. If it was confused, it was mostly confused with deep sleep and REM sleep. Also based on this data, REM sleep prediction seems to be the worst characteristic of the Garmin Venu 2. Less than 1/4 of the REM sleep matched with the REM sleep tracking of the EEG headband. Most of what was REM sleep according to the headband was predicted as being light sleep by the Venu 2. If we look at the individual nights, we indeed see that the Venu 2 missed a lot of the REM sleep, and it also often predicted it at the wrong moment, as you can see right here. Based on all these results, I would say that it really seems to struggle with detecting REM sleep correctly. It misses a large part of the REM sleep and often predicts it at the wrong moment as well. Awake detection was pretty good, with most awake time correctly predicted. If it was confused, it was mostly confused with light sleep. If we now put both assessments of the Venu 2's accuracy side by side based on the two different EEG headbands, with on the left the results of the Z-Max and on the right the results of the Dream 2 headband, we see that both basically lead to the same message. In general, the sleep tracking is not bad, however the REM sleep tracking is pretty bad. An interesting thing to note is that the Garmin Venu 2 uses a similar sleep tracking algorithm as the Xiaomi Mi Watch, which I reviewed a few weeks ago. Both of these use the Firstbeat Analytics sleep detection algorithm. Let's put the results for both of these side by side. On the left here we have the accuracy of the Garmin Venu 2 and on the right the results for the Xiaomi Mi Watch. As you can see, the sleep tracking characteristics for both are basically the same. They're both decent sleep trackers, but they do not do well with the REM sleep tracking. So how do these results compare to some of the better sleep trackers I've tested in the past? Let's take a look. That is what is plotted here. On the top left we have the same plot we saw before, showing the performance of the Venu 2. On the top right we have the results for the Whoop strap. On the bottom left for the Fitbit Inspire 2 and the bottom right the Withings sleep analyzer, which you put under your mattress. As you can see, the Venu 2 performs quite well for deep sleep, light sleep and awake. However, its major issue compared to these other devices during REM sleep tracking. If we compare it to the Fitbit Inspire 2 for instance, we see that all around the Fitbit Inspire 2 just performs better. For the next set of tests, let's take a look at the heart rate accuracy of the Garmin Venu 2. To test the heart rate accuracy, I will compare it to the Polar H10 ECG chest strap, which is generally considered one of the most accurate consumer devices available for heart rate measurements. I wore both the Venu 2 and the Polar H10 ECG chest strap for 16 spinning sessions, 9 bike rides and 10 weightlifting sessions. That way I can check my heart rate at different heart rate ranges and during different levels and types of movement. As I mentioned before, I already made a video about this. In this overview, I did add some extra data and I mentioned 1 or 2 details I did not notice before, but the overall conclusions did not really change. So feel free to skip this part of the video if you already watched the other video and you do not want to recap. Let's start off with the accuracy during spinning. Here I displayed an overview of the heart rate accuracy during spinning. Each dot here is a single heart rate measurement, with along the horizontal axis the value according to the Polar H10 ECG chest strap, and on the vertical axis the value according to the Garmin Venu 2. The blue line indicates perfect agreement, so any measurement along this line had roughly the same value for the Polar H10 and the Venu 2. The red line indicates those measurements where the value according to the Venu 2 is half that of the actual value according to the Polar H10. The reason I added this line is because in the past I've seen that many devices measure half the actual heart rate when they make a mistake. The more measurements there are in a certain area, the darker black the color. As you can see, the Venu 2 performed very well during spinning, as basically all measurements are along the blue line. However, there are still a few points away from the blue line, so let's have a look at the individual training sessions to see how good the match is. Here you see the first spinning session. Along the horizontal axis we have the time, and my heart rate is along the vertical axis. In blue I plotted my heart rate according to the Polar H10 ECG chest strap, and in red is my heart rate according to the Venu 2. As you can see, I took 3 short breaks in this spinning session where my heart rate would dip. For this first spinning session, the performance of the Venu 2 is really good. It almost perfectly overlaps the measurements from the ECG chest strap, with basically no deviations. For this second spinning session, we see more or less the same. There's almost perfect overlap between the measurements of the Polar H10 and the Venu 2. And this is basically true for all training sessions, as you can see in this one right here. The only thing I noticed is that sometimes it needs a bit of time to catch up with my increase in heart rate, as you can see here for instance. And you can also see that in this plot, right here, and right here. Overall though, this is just a minor issue. So far, this is really good. So let's now take a look at cycling outside, which I recorded whilst commuting to and from work. If I cycle outside, there are many more bumps, and I also tend to sweat a bit more in the sun, which might also influence the accuracy of the Venu 2. Let's take a look. Here we see an overview of those measurements, and as you can see, the deviation between the Venu 2 and the chest strap is now slightly larger, though still not bad. Especially below the blue line right here do we see some deviations, but above the line there's also a few. Let's take a look at some of the individual commutes to see why this is. Here we see the first commute, where indeed we see some deviation in the heart rate measurements of the Venu 2 in red and the Polar H10 chest strap in blue. For the second cycling session right here, this is already a lot better with closer overlap. And this third session right here shows even better results. In general, most cycling sessions agree pretty well, though sometimes they show a bigger deviation as in this one right here. However, many or most show good agreement, as we see in this example right here, but also in this example right here. Overall, I would say some of the later measurements I took actually show better overlap, as you see in this one right here, and also in this one right here. Compared to many other wearables, the Venu 2 actually performed quite well during cycling. Next, let's see how the Venu 2 performed during weightlifting. Now, weightlifting is notoriously difficult for wrist-worn devices, because during weightlifting I flex the muscles and tendons near my wrist, and this makes it hard for a watch to actually detect the sudden changes in my heart rate. Let's take a look. This is an overview of my heart rate accuracy similar to before. Of course, the average heart rate is much lower during weightlifting than during cardio workouts. You can see that while there are a lot of points along the blue line, there's also some points below the blue line, meaning the Venu 2 detected a too low heart rate. Let's see if we can find out why this is based on the individual training sessions. Here we see an example weightlifting session. Again, in blue is my heart rate according to the chest strap, and in red is my heart rate according to the Venu 2. We see some disagreement between both devices, but overall it's not bad compared to many of the other watches I tested. It is able to pick up on many of the spikes in my heart rate. We see the same for this session right here, where it's surprisingly good at picking up on the peaks in my heart rate and the beginning of this training session. For this training session right here, it struggled a bit more. And in this session right here, it also showed an abnormality. However, overall, it actually did quite well compared to many of the other devices that I've tested in the past. Overall, I'm very satisfied with the heart rate accuracy of the Garmin Venu 2. Though it's not perfect, it definitely outperforms most wrist-worn wearables. Next, let's take a look at SpO2 or oxygen saturation. In really simple terms, this is a percentage of red blood cells in the bloodstream that contain oxygen. This can be an important measure because it can be used as an indication for several medical conditions. For instance, it can be used to 1. Detect sleep apnea, where you can basically stop breathing for 30 seconds or more during sleep. 2. Keep track of lung diseases, and 3. Potentially detect respiratory infections such as COVID-19. In all these cases, your blood oxygen saturation can drop to anywhere from the low 90% to 60%. Normal ranges, on the other hand, are generally between 95 and 100%. Let's first have a look at the range of SpO2 values the Venu 2 measured at ground levels, which should not give very low measurements. I did this by measuring my SpO2 every morning and every evening at ground level. In total, I took 53 measurements. At the same time, I also took measurements with a dedicated SpO2 monitor. On the vertical axis here we have the SpO2 measurements. On the left are the values according to the Garmin Venu 2 and on the right according to the finger pulse oximeter. As you can see, the Venu 2 generally measured slightly lower SpO2 values, however they are mostly still in a normal range. We do see one really low measurement and also two measurements of about 92%. Overall, there seems to be a slight tendency towards lower SpO2 values as measured by the Garmin Venu 2. However, to see if the Venu 2 can detect a low oxygen saturation, I measured my oxygen saturation while flying. In flight, the pressure in the cabin is decreased, thereby leading to a lower concentration of oxygen in the air, which in turn lowers the oxygen in my blood. Here you can see how during the flight my oxygen saturation decreased. While we were parked, my SpO2 was around 98%. However, as we flew higher, you can see it dropped to about 92%. And as we descended again, my SpO2 levels went back to normal. These values here were all measured with a dedicated finger pulse oximeter. If we now plot the values according to the Venu 2 as green dots in the same plot, we get these results. As you can see, the overall patterns of the Venu 2 seem to agree with those of the finger pulse oximeter, with lower values here during the flight and rising values as we descended again. To put this into perspective, let's plot the range of SpO2 values according to the Garmin Venu 2 at ground level next to this. So this is similar to the plot that we saw before. I did remove one extremely low value from the plot for visualization purposes. As you can see, almost all the values taken at ground level were higher than those taken in the air, which indicates that the Venu 2 was able to detect a lower oxygen saturation. Now I should note that I actually took many more measurements with the Venu 2, but in the end I could only export those values taken with the health snapshot function and not the individual measurements I took, which is why there are only 4 measurements here. Overall, the SpO2 measurements of the Garmin Venu 2 at least appear to be able to detect a significantly lower SpO2 value, which does seem to indicate that you could potentially use the SpO2 measurements of the Garmin Venu S2 as a first warning when your SpO2 values have significantly decreased. While I was cycling, I also recorded my route using the Venu 2's built-in GPS. I'm still working on a way of quantifying the GPS accuracy, however this is still in the works. In this video, I want to show you how well the GPS signal was acquired and how well it followed along with the roads. Specifically, I want to see how well it tracks my path by cycling the same path multiple times and seeing how well the different paths overlap. Here we can see 5 different instances of me cycling back from work. I always initialize the cycling workout just before biking back. This means that I did not give the Venu 2 any extra time to acquire the signal. I work in this area right here, and as you can see, all the starting points are nicely clustered in this area, even though I didn't give the Venu 2 any extra time to acquire the signal. Now I took the exact same route home each time, and as you can see, the lines are nicely clustered together. The clustering in general is pretty tight. There are some moments, like right here, where there's a bit more of a deviation, but overall this is not really that bad. In general, I would say that the accuracy is pretty good, though here you can see it goes through some buildings. For the most part though, the lines are pretty tightly clustered, except for some of the exceptions that we saw before and also right here. If we now do the same thing, but now for cycling to work, we see that all the starting points nicely cluster together. Again, even though I gave it no extra time to acquire a signal. In general, the lines are pretty close together, as we can see here, and here I did indeed take a different route. So overall, I'm pretty satisfied with the GPS accuracy of the Garmin Venu 2. Overall, the GPS signal appears to be acquired quite quickly and the paths appear to be pretty consistent. So based on these results, I would say that the GPS tracking is pretty good. However, as I said, I'm working on ways of better quantifying this. I was thinking about using trajectory similarity calculations using dynamic time warping. However, if you have any thoughts on how to best test this, leave this in the comments below. The Venu 2 also features a step counter. To see if this counts my steps accurately, I went out and took exactly 4,000 steps in segments of 1,000 steps. To get an accurate step count, I manually counted my steps using this tally counter. Let's take a look at the results. As I mentioned, for the step counting test, I went out and I took 4 times exactly 1,000 steps. I wore the Venu 2 on my right arm and I alternated holding the tally counter in my right and left hand for each set of 1,000 steps I did, which is what the right and left labels refer to right here. Now these are the actual steps counted by the Venu 2 when I was wearing it on my right arm, and as you can see they're pretty close to the actual 1000 steps I took for each of the 4 segments. However, the Venu 2 did tend to overcount some steps, especially during these first 1000 steps where I was also walking down some stairs, it did overcount a bit more. Just to put it into perspective, here are the steps counted by the GTS2 Mini I wore at the same time. As you can see, it arguably performed slightly better than the Venu 2, however both were pretty good. Overall, the step counting of the Venu 2 seems to be pretty good, or at least it counts the correct number of steps while I'm walking. What I still want to see if it counts any false positive steps. With that I mean, does it count any steps when it's not supposed to count steps? For instance, while doing indoor exercises or cycling outside. Overall, I'm pretty satisfied with the Garmin Venu 2. The heart rate tracking was quite good. It performed extremely well while exercising on my stationary bike, and it also did quite well while cycling outside, though it did show some minor issues. During weightlifting it was definitely not perfect, but it did better than many of the other watches I tested. The sleep tracking was okay overall, only the REM sleep tracking was not very good. The SpO2 tracking appears to be able to detect a low oxygen saturation, and the GPS paths were pretty consistent when I rode the same track multiple times. Finally, the step counting was also pretty good, though it did tend to slightly overcount my steps. So, should you buy the Garmin Venu 2? Well, if you're looking for a smartwatch with good heart rate tracking and decent GPS tracking, SpO2 tracking and step counting, then it's definitely a good option. The sleep tracking is also okay, with good deep sleep and light sleep tracking. However, the Venu 2 did show some issues during REM sleep tracking. All in all though, I would recommend the Venu 2 as an overall fitness and health tracker. If you're just interested in tracking your heart rate during exercises, I'd recommend a chest strap like the Polar H10 to get the most reliable results. If you're an iPhone user and you want the most accurate heart rate tracking from a watch, then I would recommend an Apple Watch. If you want the best sleep tracking from a watch, get a Fitbit device like the Fitbit Luxe, Fitbit Charge 5 or the Fitbit Inspire 2. The Withings Sleep Analyzer, which you put under your mattress, also performs reasonably well. The Whoop strap has good heart rate tracking and also good sleep tracking. However, this is a subscription service, so significantly more expensive in the long term. Finally, I should mention some of the limitations of the data that I showed here. First of all, I just tested the watch for a limited number of days and just on me, and it will be interesting to see how it performs on others. Furthermore, it might perform differently during different types of exercises like swimming or running. In my videos, I do scientific tests on different devices like the Oura Ring, the Fitbit and the Scanwatch, and in the end I hope to use tracking to improve my life. So if you like that subject and like this video, consider subscribing to my channel and also consider giving it a thumbs up because it makes it easier for other people to find my videos. Thank you so much for watching. If you want more content like this, consider subscribing to my channel and also watch some of my other videos.